So we're now recording, and the last thing I'd like to do is for everybody to give a just a real shout out to all the frontline workers and all the people that are really in the midst of COVID, just doing some incredible work. None of us have to have masks on here, but it's just been such a year of hard things to get used to that hopefully from here on we'll be, I won't say coasting for any means. We're not coasting out of this, but hopefully things will continue to get better. So thanks to all the frontline workers. Okay, over to you, Vitold, to introduce a little bit more of tonight's event and to start the speakers.
Thank you, Barry. And as Barry was saying, this is our 7th Zoom event on our 5th theme. Our 4th theme. My mistake, 4th theme. And when we first thought about all the things that we could do locally in Grey Bruce, this topic of zero waste, minimizing our waste in our lives was one of the first things that popped to our minds. I think that when you think of waste, we all have to deal with it, whether it's waste of energy, waste of food, the waste that comes with packaging and plastic. And, sometimes we can get hard on ourselves, when we waste our time or waste our energy and have to do things over. So we all understand what the definition of the word waste is. What I found a little disturbing was now that we now have 5 major islands in the 5 major oceans of the world, and these 5 major islands are all made of plastic. And the one in the Pacific is the size of the state of Texas. So that's not something that we can be proud of. But this could be a very broad and big topic. And so what we want to do is we wanted to show what was happening locally. So what we normally do is we have pre-taped videos of people, which we'll have 3 of those. But our first speaker was someone who I had heard speak a few times in the past. He is the public works manager for the Township of Southgate, Jim Ellis. I was so impressed with his presentations and to see that there is a community and there is a municipality in Grey that has taken, I'll say, very innovative steps into minimizing what goes into their landfill and to attempt to lower the carbon footprint based upon the municipality level of thinking. So what I'm going to do, this is going to be a live presentation that will have PowerPoint or shared screen, which other people will take care of. So I hope that Jim will be unmuted, and then after his talk, during his talk, please submit your questions into the chat box so that Simona can organize them and ask, so we can ask Jim any questions that pop up. I hope that all the rest will be, everyone else will be muted so that we'll give Jim our full attention. So let me present to you Jim Ellis. There you go, Jim.
Good evening, good people. Thank you for the opportunity to share the Township of Southgate's waste resources and diversion management systems. Can we pull up the slide deck, please? Sort today, save tomorrow. That slogan was originated through the elementary, well, it was put out to schools, but it was an elementary school student back in 2003 that came up with this slogan. And we've built on it numerous of times. This is our newest rendition of the graphics for it. Next slide, please. So Southgate, for any of you that don't know, we are in the southeast corner of Grey County, the gateway to Grey. That was another slogan that was back in amalgamation to name the community, and that's how Southgate was arrived also as the name. So we've went through quite a bit of residential growth lately and continue to. So these numbers are not reflective of today's residents, but you can see we're probably closer to 8,000 residents, or closer to that number anyways. So next slide, please. So back in 2003, after amalgamation, we were a little bit stumbled with where we were going, because one municipality of an amalgamation was picking up recycling and putting waste in a dump. The second one was landfilling with no recycling, no curbside collection. And the third one was landfilling without recycling. So the cost for the system, when it was implemented back in the time of 2003, to close the landfills and create 2 transfer stations was $3.4 million. Currently, right now, we have 3 full-time driver operators for the system, 4 part-time transfer station attendants, and working with those people as my administration assistant, myself, and the fleet manager who looks after the fleet for any maintenance and problems. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, we have 2 transfer stations now, 1 landfill, and it has a scale. And we own all the land around the landfill, which is the CAS zone. We have a compost facility, and we still monitor 2 closed landfills. Next slide, please. This is our oldest truck in the fleet now. This is a 2013. As you can see, it's a one-armed bandit. It comes out and grabs the cart, and we'll see some of those shortly. These are fairly substantial investments. These trucks cost over $300,000 a piece. Next slide, please. And those are our 3 carts. We have 240-liter carts for organics, waste, and we have an upsize for the blue recycling, which is at 360 liters. To make notice of other programs that are within Ontario for organics, you can see that there's always sometimes those smaller carts, but these ones here, we accept yard and leaf waste. We take branches if you can get them in there, and you're supposed to be able to get the lid to close. But next slide, please. This is the Dundalk transfer station. Dundalk is the metropolis of Southgate. It's our biggest center. As I mentioned, it's a closed landfill now, and this is only a drop-off. Everything gets picked up and diverted to other places of destination or to the Egremont landfill site. Next slide, please. And this is the Egremont landfill site that was created back in the time with the at 2003 with the sawtooths for collecting diversion materials. To the right is the compost pad. Next slide, please. Just for other diversion practices, we have an orange drop. That's for municipal hazardous and special waste. We are the first to have a first mobile unit in Ontario. And we move that in between Dundalk and Egremont transfer stations every 3 months. But due to COVID and handling practices right now, that has ceased to operate at this point in time. We're hoping we can get it going again soon. But I want to just point out that if this investment is very minimal, really, it takes a change to your ECA process to be able to allow it through the ministry. But For $20,000, you can have one of these containers created. They're explosion proof. They've got secondary containment for spills. It's got ventilation. This is where everyone should be going. And I know that programs are changing, like blue blocks and municipal hazards and special waste, tires, electronics. This is a great investment for any municipality to keep those things managed in the proper place rather than going to landfill or in your ditches or poured down a sewer or whatever the case. This is a cheap way to keep and save the environment. Next slide, please. Like other municipalities, we're doing other non-funded sources, and we do get some payback in places. We do white goods and scrap metal, drywall, shingles, clothing reuse bins, reuse items, brush and dirty wood, and compost in the Township of Southgate. The final product is free to residents. Next slide, please. Some of the challenges over time has been the bulky plastic waste. The MRFs don't really want to see those. We have sent some to MRFs and had to pay on top, but it's better than putting them in the landfill in the long run. Carpet, we tried that. We had it run in after we collected for a while that the proponent didn't want, he wanted it cut to a certain size, and we had it dry, but it was hard to manage, and we have not got that program figured out quite yet, but we're willing to look at it, because in carpet, there is a lot of oil materials that can be extracted and recaptured. So there is a lot of benefit, but was hard for us to try and meet the requirements at this point in time. Our rural municipalities are really challenged with bale wrap, and it continues to be a problem. We currently have it in our program as landfilling, but you can see out there, you can drive by and you can tell that the farms are disposing of it other ways, and it's going up in the air most of the time. So we have to find better ways, especially for bale wrap. That has to be, it creates such a large volume. It seems minuscule by the time you maybe reduce it, but that is a real problematic source material that has to be dealt with. And like everyone, plastic bags, not only in landfill, it's a real problem in our organic system too. And habits of human nature seem to really drive how things can be either done in a better way or they stay in the way they are. But that public education through the schools, we came through it back in our time as recycling was just starting to roll out, and there was a pretty good buy-in. We see nowadays that some of the other times of decades of people coming through, that we've given them this information and promotion and education, and they're still not buying in and they're still not getting it. We are educating our young people still, but why did that generations in between decide that they're not going to follow the practices that we need to? Sorry, I'm jumping around here a little bit. We have worked on mattress program. We are not quite there. We're getting there though. So next slide, please. So with our 2003 conversion, we were through our ECA mandated to have a public liaison committee, and that had to have a terms of reference, resident involvement, and public education. We still do that. Back when this system started with the carts, it was fairly busy. And since then, there has been very little involvement unfortunately, with the Public Liaison Committee and the public. There's not much buy-in. It's still running, but at a reduced capacity. We are down to one meeting a year right now. And anyhow, we are meeting our requirements with the ministry. They're satisfied, and there's an opportunity there for the public, but they just really aren't engaging. Maybe they're comfortable with the system. Next slide, please. So with that environmental compliance approval, I just wanted to highlight here, when we drafted this, a serviced area means the area from which waste can be received. And we can, namely from the counties of Grey, Bruce, Huron, Wellington, Simcoe, Dufferin, and Perth, and the region of Waterloo, the township of Southgate can receive municipal hazardous and special waste materials and also compostable organics. Our system right now is set up that we can receive others' materials. We cannot receive landfill. We have been looking at waste that way, but we haven't got there. Next slide, please. It was very important when we started this system to be able to measure what we're doing. And that's why scales are so important to have. And you need to have these scales, and more municipalities are bringing them on. But guessing at what you have and how many tones for data collection or whatever, you need to have the numbers. Next slide, please. This is our outdoor compost facility that's on an asphalt pad. As you can see, it's in various stages. The pile to the right is growing a little bit. It reached its maturity, so it's just sitting there waiting for the final processing of taking it through a screening process. We generally, for our materials, do that only once a year. Next slide, please. So we do outdoor windrowing. We get that working to a 70 to 74 degrees Celsius to break down weeds and foods and bones in that compost. We flip it usually weekly. Sometimes we have to add water to it. We also grind our brush materials and add it to an additive. We also have some other sources of material. We do collect some food waste from Blue Mountain Resorts. We do collect materials from the Reinhardt Vinegar Factory in Stainer that as silica sand, and we blend that into some of this compost that breaks down. Next slide, please. For Southgate, we're currently, and again, these numbers have changed a little bit, but we're composting is diverting in 2018 about 32% of curbside collected materials from the landfill. And we're averaging in around over 700 tons per year that we're pulling out. And organics can be up to 40+% of weight in garbage. So pulling organics out is very beneficial for landfill longevity. Like I said before, we use clean wood to get into the program to use it as a diversion material. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, about over 700 tons, and we're still currently above that. Next slide, please. This is operating costs again for 2018. You can see it's about $50,000 a year. That's kind of a little bit biased in ways, because for Southgate, we collect organics every week with the One-Armed Bandit truck. We collect every other week, bi-weekly, recycling and waste. So that truck's still running around. We've broken into some costs, but it's not totally reflective, I don't believe, of the operation, how it runs. But The composting processing is about $18,000 a year to do that. That's with turning the pile and all the other activities that have to go on with it. Next slide, please. So growing out of our compost in our pile, in 2018, we won the Compost Canada Giant Pumpkin with a 396 pound vegetable there. Tom is very proud of it. We have grown them in the past. We got them to 100 and 200 pounds, but we're proud of this one. Next slide, please. This is to do with our collection trucks and what's wrong with this picture. Looks fairly normal. Next slide, please. So what ends up happening is with these cameras, we get a call received that we didn't pick up their materials. And with the trucks, we go back and we view some footage and we can look. We looked at that picture. It's time stamped. We've come through. You said you had your stuff out. There's obviously no carts in the picture. So it's not necessarily our problem that you missed collection for whatever reason. And you believe me, I've heard many of them that they're not there. We can't pick them up. It's not our fault. So it's imperative to have your materials out on time. And we use this stuff weekly to deal with obstacles that come in our way. Customer service is big with us, and we have to get that done. P&E, we visit the schools. We've ran different programs with Inside My Blue Cart to get information to students to take home. And we also take these to other local festivals. And we've done From Your Green Cart Back to the Earth programs. And we are continuing to do that. Obviously, COVID has been a challenge. This year, talking with the schools, obviously we couldn't get in there. And they said, well, can you do something video related or something? And we looked at it and, we looked at outside sourcing. And long story short, we came up that, well, we weren't spending necessarily our $7,000 worth of P&E this year. So we invested it into a video camera computer system for under $2,000. We haven't we're working on it. Our IT is setting it up right now. We haven't used it, but that's going to give us the capability to reach out in these times. Hopefully they're short. It's not going to continue, but it's going to be a great tool for us to utilize in the upcoming promotion and education. Big centers, we hear about Peel and wherever, Kitchener, like they've got great programs, they've got great things going on, but us small municipalities can't compete. We don't have the dollars to work with, but I think this is going to be a valuable tool going forward, and we're looking forward to starting with it. Next slide, please. This was one thing too we didn't have till 2015 or 16 was a compactor. And to be able to get your space utilized with compacting landfill materials. We have currently, with our fill rates right now, and we have a new study coming out, but last year's study, our landfill has 80 years of capacity still remaining. Next slide, please. Just another promotion and education booth. Next slide, please. Compost in the winter. You can tell the snow is not on it. It's working. Next slide, please. Again, we've had challenges. We've went out. We've done stuff. This is stuff we do on our own. That this isn't a garbage cart. We're having a lot of recycling challenges being contaminated. But this is the stuff you got to get out and do and pick up on at times. Next slide, please. We tie this into our energy management policy. And as most of you are probably aware, that waste has a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. and with organics and composting in the stream. So pulling that stuff out will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. So this is one of our many contests we have with the public schools. This one was probably what do you think of our system or something. So as you can see, it shows the 3 carts. We generally give the prize winners potted Christmas trees, so to say, because we do it usually in early December. So the other thing I would just like to say, there was back at the end of last year, some information about how much household costs were per municipality. And we did another in-depth dive into that after that was released through the county, through some Blue Mountain information. And we have that report, and if anyone would like to see it, I'd share it with you. And thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. We'll let you catch your breath for a moment. Are you able to stay and answer some questions from some of our participants?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, great. So I think Simona has some, has checked in all her, all the questions. So Simona, can you give Jim some questions that are in the chat box?
Sure thing. So Jim, we know that Southgate had provincial help to start your composting program. What is the best way to promote this in Grey Highlands, where that extra money may not be available?
Well, you obviously got to have somewhere to take the materials, and like I showed you, our ECA allows us to take your materials. You need a way to collect it. You got to figure out how you're going to get it there. So that is something that municipalities are going to have to put their thinking caps on. And, you know, like I say, lots of municipalities have those small little carts. You wheel them out, they're like 3 lunch kits or something. But I mean, for Southgate, we've got a 240 liter cart. That's a lot of material going in there. So we're open for business if we can work with any of our partners.
Mm-hmm. Next one, what do you do with the orange box content when it's full?
We have a contractor that comes in and takes that material away and then disposes of it. Generally, when we empty that thing out, it's fairly full in the 3 months that it's there. Sometimes we have to get it unloaded sooner. It's generally costs around $2,000 to $3,000 to dispose of that material. We do get some of that money back, but we have to make sure it's empty before we can move it to our other site. It has to be, we cannot have materials in there. So that has to be done, even if it's only half full or whatever, we have to ensure that for transportation.
Right. Does any of the material in the orange box gets reused? Do you know if there is any buyer for these materials?
Well, we are allowed through our program, if there's paint and we get lots of full cans or whatever, if someone wants to take that full can, we have to track it a little bit, but that can be reused out of that orange drop as of it sits. But a lot of that material, like paint, gets recycled through the recycling programs, as so does some of the other materials that we collect.
Mm-hmm. Next question, is it legal to burn bale wrap? Would it be better to just put it in the landfill? And how much capacity is there in your system to receive organics?
Well, definitely not. It's not environmentally friendly to burn bale wrap.
Isn't it plastic? Plastic, right?
It's plastic, yes. But that's what you see, that, you know, farmers end up with wagons load of this stuff. And we did receive it for a while, and we had a place for it to go. They made plastic boards out of it, but that program since quit for municipalities somewhat, because farmers, unfortunately, it's a hard product to deal with because, you know, there's snow and ice on it, there's dirt, they grab it, and it becomes in as contaminated almost. The companies now want to pick it up at the farm just clean, and if they can do that, that's fine. But they don't want to get into where it's been picked up by a loader and it's all contaminated. And that's our problem these days, but we have to find a solution.
Good one. Next question. How do you measure your GHG emissions from the landfill?
Well, currently we don't have a methane gas system in our collection of landfill. So we are not measuring greenhouse gas emissions, only by what, when you do your data upload to some of the systems, there's calculations that can give you information, but we are not collecting.
Right. Well, I have a last question. I understand that there are other speakers line up. Do you recycle styrofoam?
No, not at this point. Bruce Davidson, we've looked at those systems. That's awesome. We don't seem to have a amount of it like they do, I know, over there in Brockton. But anyhow, we'd like to work on that eventually also.
Thank you, Jim, very much.
Well, thank you, Jim. You've been a wealth of information, and I hope that other people have seen that if it can happen in Southgate, and you have definitely given us an opportunity that other municipalities can follow your lead and make use of some of your service. So thank you very much for sharing all that you have tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Next on our agenda will be our first video that we did last fall. We were really privileged to get a wealth of, some more wealth of information from the Owen Sound Waste Watchers, and we were lucky enough to have Laura Wood answer many different questions and offer her expertise and insights into this waste issue. So if you'd be kind enough, Kevin, so we can see what transpired in that interview. I would like to introduce Laura Wood to our viewers. She's from Owen Sound Waste Watchers, and I thank you very much for taking the time to join us in this series.
It's great to be here.
Maybe a first question I should ask you, Laura, and I know you've spoken to many people in the Owen Sound area. What is the Owen Sound Waste Watchers?
So the Owen Sound Waste Watchers is a group of community volunteers that all believe that an individual can make a difference, specifically in the area of the products that we purchase, consume, and then put out to the curb to be taken away and disposed of. We believe in the power of the individual as opposed to waiting for others to act. We call ourselves action heroes. And just one simple act at a time.
I assume that your goal then is to look at individuals' household waste.
We do, but of course, we're also looking at waste that individuals use when they're out and about as well. So single-use plastic, that type of thing that might be then put into a trash can, or in some cases end up on the streets. So it's not just household waste, but it's primarily waste that individuals use.
So before we get to those specifics, can you tell me the importance of waste as a climate action?
Yes, it's really interesting. We started as a group with one trash pickup. And from that, often people will say, well, you're all about making the streets clean. But what we encountered during those pickups was picking up individual items and starting to think about those items like a straw. And then listening to other groups saying, okay, what was the life of that straw? So someone could use it one time and then throw it out. So we tend to think broadly about what individuals use, how they can actually change their behavior and make just one little change will make a huge difference on our waste system.
So you're really talking about a way of thinking that is more than just what we do today, but its impact down the road as well.
Yes, so there's all sorts of ways that it impacts climate change. It's the carbon footprint of producing those products, and we have a whole module on thinking sustainably. So for example, if it takes so much energy to create a product and you only use it once, we call that an expensive product, as opposed to a product that you would use time and time again, and we're respecting the energy that's being used to make that product. The other really interesting thing about impact on climate change is things like the disposal of food waste and what goes into landfill. So if food goes into landfill and it is buried under the ground, then methane gas is created. It can escape, and it's an extremely toxic greenhouse gas. As opposed to if you chose to compost, or with your friends were composting, or took your compost somewhere else, or if your municipality picked up your compost and it went to an industrial composting site, then it would actually decompose with oxygen and create carbon dioxide. Now, we tend to think of carbon dioxide as a horrible thing. It is more natural than methane, and it is less toxic and has less of an impact on greenhouse gas, as a greenhouse gas. So therefore, here we've seen the impact of our products and how we use them and how it impacts climate change.
So it's given that we now know, and scientists have actually shown this, that at least a quarter of food that is grown is wasted or lost in some form.
Yes.
This does put a little bit of extra responsibility on you and I.
It does.
And our food choices, does it not?
It does, and actually we just did a presentation on that, becoming more waste aware, and we talked about the food cycle and the fact that the Canadian waste characterization study that was released this year says that 23% of what goes to the curb is food waste. So our group will look at that and say, okay, well, what can an individual do? What's an easy thing an individual can do? Well, I know from my point of view, I can make a food list. I won't go into a grocery store and go, that looks good. It'll sit in my fridge for 2 weeks and then I'll throw it out because it's gone mad. So a food list. I'm a huge believer in leftovers. So when I cook, I always make extra food for myself. That means I have lunch tomorrow. As a result, there's not a lot that's going directly from our fridge or from our shelves into the garbage can. We then take it, and a lot of people take it one step further. They will say, okay, how can I not put that in the garbage can? And as I've mentioned, the composting. And in our family, through this journey, we learned about bokashi composting. So not only are we doing vegetable composting, but we're also doing the dairy, any sort of spoiled dairy, any cheese rinds, bones for meat, etc. They would go into bokashi, be fermented, and then they can be added to a composting bin. Often I would speak with people about, how about you try this, how about you try that? And they'd say, well, I can't make that change. It's amazing the changes that we've made as a population in the last 6 to 9 months. I've been surprised by businesses who have said, of course. So it's not as big a challenge as it was, say, 2 or 3 years ago. I think the world is sort of catching up and realizing that the excess that we have has caused a lot of waste.
Now, if I could just change the subject matter a bit, because I know that single-use plastic is a big issue.
Yes.
And most people are aware of it to some level. Can you offer any further information to help us out to know what our situation with plastics is?
Well, single-use plastic is a huge problem, and I don't have all the stats for you, but I can just tell you during our trash pickups. Our group does regular trash pickups, and even during COVID, we have revised how we do it. We've called them Alone Together. So our volunteers go out independently. They pick up trash, we categorize it. This year we've picked up close to 70,000 pieces. A lot of it is plastic. What we're discovering now is a lot of it is fragmented plastic because plastic breaks down. It doesn't biodegrade, it just breaks into smaller and smaller pieces. And if you happen to be near a water source, then that will get into your water source. I was just down along Lake Ontario and sifting through the sand a couple of weeks ago, and it's just shocking to see how many little bits of plastic. We've actually seen it here in Owen Sound near the bay shore, where there's been a lot of water that's come in. This is not stuff that was littered here. This is stuff that's being used elsewhere. Single-use plastic is expensive. You know, as a society, we decide convenience is the most important thing, but it's expensive to the planet. So we can have convenience today, but what we're discovering around the world is there's not enough place to put this plastic.
You raise a very important aspect of plastic, and that's the whole area of microplastics.
Yeah.
How they have invaded, in many ways, our food system and our bodies.
Yeah.
Many times we look at plastics, as you say, what we can see, but many times is what we don't see because it is not destroyed. Do you have anything to say about, because you mentioned about our area, that you've already seen it here in the Owen Sound area, and that it didn't necessarily come from us. It does show up someplace, whether we use it or not. And I'm just asking you, what happens to the single-use plastic? I mean, I thought that it was all going to be recycled. Can you help us on the true story of where plastics end up?
Plastic, when you recycle it, cannot be recycled into the same level of integrity that it started with. So there's a natural degradation of the product as it is recycled down, and it becomes cheaper and cheaper, more flimsy as it is recycled down. So typically you would have straws and plastic forks would be towards the bottom end of the recycling journey. If you look at your recycling, you'll see codes 1, 2, 3, 4, down to 6. The 1s and 2s are the ones that are of value. And the recycling business is a business. So if there isn't a market for it and they can't get enough money for it, it will then become waste. Another very disturbing development is when you are along the harbor and you find little things called nurdles. And nurdles are kind of a raw material of recycled plastic. So what happens when the plastic comes in, then it goes to a processing system and then they actually separate it, they melt it down and create little pellets called nurdles. They almost look like tiny, tiny pills, and they're quite uniform. So when I'm sifting through often the sand, you'll find nurdles and you're thinking, how did a nurdle get here? This is a raw product for manufacturing. The other thing about microplastics is they attract all sorts of toxins as well. So in our drinking water, not only do we have plastic, but we have all those weird little beings that are attached to it. So it's something for us all to consider when we are using single-use stuff. It's going to come back.
What is the carbon impact and the dollar cost of us producing waste?
I don't really know the answer to that. I know that we pay so much money for waste management in Owen Sound. I know that we haven't been able to afford a green bin program for composting. The Ontario government is actually migrating towards a new Blue Box program where the producers will be 100% responsible for that. So I'm hoping there will be some money that's available for a composting program in our city soon. I know I watched that Winnipeg just launched it the other day and their people were saying, we're sorry it's taken us so long. So I'm really looking forward to when we can have it here. Again, you know, we don't really concentrate on people's wasteful ways. I think it's more that people aren't aware of the impact of their waste. You know, there's always a sliver of a population who says, I don't care. And then there's a larger part of the population that said, I never knew. And so our group wants to educate people that there's an impact to choices we make every single day. And we really focus on just make one change. So for example, you could make one change of saying, I'm never going to buy a water bottle again, plastic water bottle. I won't use it in a meeting. You can make that one change, see how that goes. So I really think that individuals have a lot of power if they know. So that's what our group is about.
You really touched upon one of the 3 basic R's that I remember being taught when I was young. Would you like to say anything about the 3 R's?
Oh yes, so the Owen Sound Waste Watchers has a website that we call sort of our information hub, and we say there's 7 simple things that you can do. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 is, get your R's in order. So what happened was, back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, they brought forward this concept of the 3 R's. And immediately everybody started recycling. And that was the 3rd R. So when we talk about the 3 R's, we say rethink, reuse, and then recycle. And the reason for that is that most people feel they've done their job when they put the item in the recycling bin and it goes out to the end of the curb. But they may not know that only 9% of plastic is actually effectively recycled, and the rest of it is going to go into landfill. So all of those noble things that we thought we were doing aren't actually happening. They're out of our control. The only thing that's in our control is choosing to purchase those products, choosing to use those products. So we need to rethink what we're doing, what we're purchasing, how much we're purchasing. We need to take the items and reuse them. Understand what your municipality will and will not recycle. Just because it's got the little symbol on the bottom doesn't mean that your municipality will take it. And quite frankly, I've seen items with the recycling symbol on the bottom with no code. When I shop, I look at things and I look at the packaging as well, because I understand it's part of the product. So if I purchase something, for example, if I'm going to go out and buy some carrots, in every grocery store you can find what we say food in the nude. You can find carrots, single carrots, or you can buy the ones in a plastic bag. Well, guess what? Those plastic bags have holes in them so that there's a little bit of air that's coming into the carrots. So it's really of no use to me after. I can't use that plastic bag again. So I will buy the individual carrots. The neat thing about that is I'll buy 4 carrots because I know I'm going to use 4 carrots. When I buy the bag of carrots and it sits in my fridge, chances are some of it's going to become compost.
It seems like you're advocating that it's our awareness of this issue that is the first stumbling block to many people's road to get to wasting less.
I think that government leading is needed. I think companies being responsive to what consumers want is needed. But I don't believe it's going to start until consumers know, and the ones who are willing become vocal, change their buying patterns, talk to the companies. The companies will listen because the consumer is the one that basically funds what they're doing.
When I was a little younger, I heard the motto, waste not, want not, pollute not.
Oh, that's a good one to add to that. I didn't hear that one, but I heard the first 2.
Yeah, and this seems to mean something in today's world.
Yes.
Do you think, based upon your advocacy, that we are on the right path, or can you give us hints of how individuals, besides educating themselves, can feel that they are on the right path?
I think people just know. I'm telling you, we have these funny sayings, which is, you feel like a superhero because you remembered your refillable cup that day. There's just this feeling inside that you're doing the right thing. And I think for the most part, people do care. They just need to know how to translate it into their personal life because they're afraid it's going to mean they have to change everything about themselves. And That's why the Owen Sound Waste Watchers always says, just start with one thing. I know for our household, once we became more aware of packaging, this doesn't seem to go together, but we started shopping based on packaging. It naturally stopped us from buying in excess, and our food bill actually went down. So that I found was quite fascinating because we didn't do it. Some of the items we were buying were more expensive, but we were buying less and throwing out less. So Waste Watchers, we're talking about household waste right now, but one of the reasons we picked that name was we thought, oh, what'll happen in 5 years if the issue of household waste is gone? Well, waste is bigger than just household stuff. It's also, where do I live? How do I heat my home? What's the size of the place I live in? Do I drive everywhere? Do I bicycle and walk? These types of decisions we make as consumers can make a big difference when it comes to climate change.
If you had any words of advice to whoever's watching, is there one piece of advice that you would offer based upon your experience?
I think, the obvious one I could say is try one thing, start small. But I think what I'd like to say is that to understand you have the power. We do have the power of controlling the decisions we make as individuals.
I really thank you, Laura, for taking the time to share not only the topic of waste, but also your journey as well.
Thank you. If I can just very quickly say, I'd really love to thank our dedicated volunteers. Owen Sound Waste Watchers is a group of people that work together. We have a planning team of 4 individuals, a few of us that are over 50 and another young woman who's in her 2nd year of university, and they're a great group of people that get together and say, what are we going to do next? Then we have these dedicated people that pick up trash and have made changes in their own lives. And then we have all of these followers as well. So, it isn't one person or even 4 people, it's just the power of community and reaching out to other people who share the same interests. So I'd like to thank all of the Owen Sound Waste Watchers.
Thank you. Well, that was just a very worthwhile and very meaningful interview that I did back with Laura last fall. And we're lucky to have her with us. So Simona, if you would be kind enough to offer to Laura any questions that arose, and we'll have Laura here to answer them. Thank you.
Absolutely. Welcome, Laura. It's happy to have you. So the first question was, how was the COVID situation impacted the work of Owen Sound Waste Watchers?
It did impact in several fronts. First of all, we have these group activities once the weather gets nicer, where we meet together and we pick up trash and we share ideas. And of course, we couldn't do that. So we waited for a couple months, like the rest of us waited to see what was going to happen in the world. And then we said, darn it, we're not going to waste the whole summer. So I think as of June, we started this program called Alone Together. And we had this similar trash pickup exercises, but we had people picking a certain spot away from the other people. You'd go out with your family. Then they could either count the trash the way that we normally do because we classify it on our pickups, or they could drop it off at my house. Quite frankly, we're very used to counting trash at my house. So we did that for about 5 or 6 months. The other great thing that happened because of COVID is then we started getting together on Zoom. And from it came the idea of producing PowerPoint presentations and then making them into videos. So that wouldn't have come up, I don't think, if we had, it was a matter of necessity for us to chat. The year before we would have the trash pickup, then we would meet in a local business and we discuss a certain topic. So the pandemic actually changed the way we had our group activities, but also then opened up a new venue for us, being the Zoom chats, but also the videos that we produce. We're about to launch number 5, which is how to reduce household waste, and that's going to go up next week on our YouTube channel. The other thing that was difficult was we were about to start a program with interested merchants to become part of a group of organizations that would have a BYOB or whatever it was sticker on their door so that people could bring their own containers. We'd already talked to several merchants about this, and of course that had to stop immediately. And from many of us, a personal loss was Bulk Barn. A lot of us do our shopping at Bulk Barn, and even though we're very COVID friendly, many of us can't bring ourselves to take things out of there in plastic bags after spending 2 years with bringing our jars and filling them. So that has put a dent in our daily life, but we found ways around that.
Thank you. I love Bulk Barn. I'm bringing
Me
my own
too.
containers.
I miss them.
Mm-hmm. Do you happen to know if so-called compostable plastic is indeed biodegradable?
Do you know, there's so much confusion about different types of plastic. There's compostable, there's biodegradable, there's plant-based plastic, which sort of blows my mind. In a lot of cases, these plastics do not compost in regular situations. They need industrial strength type of composting facilities. I don't know if Jim is still with us. I don't know if that's something that they can handle in Southgate. For the most part, I don't believe these items are the solution to the problem. I think there needs to be more of a reusable as opposed to a disposable type of packaging.
Thank you. It seems like we have 2 questions regarding the new producer pay system. So we understand we are in the transition for the blue box. And how does the new producer pay system work? One, municipalities still have to pick up blue boxes. And then the second question is basically similar, but it's our understanding that this excludes things like styrofoam and plastic film. So what solution do you think would be the best for these excluded items?
Well, first of all, the Blue Box program is something that everyone touts as a wonderful success. It depends on, I guess, what your objectives are, but the Blue Box program has been 50% producer funded already, and 50%, the current program, 50% of the cost is borne by each municipality. So they're moving towards a model with 100% that will free up money at the municipality level to invest in other things. There will be items. Once again, it comes down to, is there a market for the item? And if there is not a market for the item, you will see that it is not being, it's not a product that recyclers are using. Plastic film, right now, there isn't a huge market for that. Styrofoam, there's a limited market. And if you get a city like Toronto that's recycling styrofoam, they basically will take over the whole market. So I think rather than speak to, we should spend our time trying to find a solution for a product that doesn't make sense financially in the system, because that is what's really going to drive recycling, is if it financially makes sense for a company. Will they make money off of this product? I think it's much better to invest in what's the alternative to that product.
Thank you. Vitold, do we have still time for one more question, or how we are doing? Thank you. So most people have heard about the negative impacts of plastic. What do you believe that needs to happen in order to change behaviors around waste collectively?
I do believe it is education. Jim talked about the fact at the beginning they went into the schools and they educated. We talk about the lost generation that didn't really sink into their pores. But think back, we were not told about the health issues to do with it. We were all talked about how great a recycling industry was, but there really wasn't a lot of education about the amount of plastic that's floating around out there. The fact there's plastic that is so small, it's in our drinking system and it's passing through the filters as well. There's a shocking thing, and it's probably just because I've recently become a grandmother, where I watched a study that said a baby that was only being breastfed had plastic in its system. And so, this is not something that we can control anymore. And I think if it's a convenient product, but it's a product that is expensive to the environment, and I don't think it's good for you, for our health. I'm not a scientist, but when I hear things like what I just shared with you, I don't believe it's supposed to be in the blood system. So, I think if we start educating people not only about what goes into the blue box, but also how much energy it takes to produce that item, and then what the damage that item is doing, not only to the planet, but to individuals, I think people will get it. I mean, people look out for their self-interest. And if you educate them in that regard, I think they will get it.
Thank you.
It's kind of a negative thing to end on. Holy cow. And that's not
it actually what came to my mind is that, that advertising that they say, we cannot afford to buy a cheap stuff.
Yeah.
But I know the education is a slow process. That's probably.
The one thing I would say is that, honestly, I am not a scientist. I'm a fairly committed person, but once I started thinking about how can I actually reduce my household waste, what is going to our curb is now 23% of what it used to be 2 years ago. And, on some days there might be a little bit of grumbling in our household. Normally I'm doing most of the stuff, so that's okay. But it makes me feel good every single day. I'm making a difference. And I keep looking at the stats from the city of Owen Sound and saying, what if only 10% reduced it by half? We could afford green bin, So it is something that we can do. And as the founder of 1 Million Women said out of Australia, one person doesn't need to make a million changes in their life. We just need 1 million people making one change for 1 million changes. So I would encourage everyone to think small. Think about that one new thing you can do. If you're already doing one thing, find one more new thing to reduce waste, and I think we'll all benefit.
Well, thank you, Laura. You ended up on a positive note, right?
Trying to get there.
Well, thank you again for sharing with us and for being here tonight. It was a pleasure. To move along, I would like to ask Kevin to get the next video where we are presenting Bruce Davidson. His name was already mentioned once tonight, who is the chair of the Brockton Environmental Advisory Committee. And also he's on the Waste Management Committee for Hanover and Walkerton. Bruce has been involved with waste reduction programs and initiatives for quite some time, and it was a very good interview we did. So Kevin, would you be kind enough? And today we also have Bruce Davidson. I'd like to thank Bruce for being here. Now, Bruce is the chairman of the Brockton Environmental Advisory Committee. He's also a committee member of the joint Hanover-Walkerton Waste Management Committee. It sounds like you're a busy gentleman.
Well, have been over the past basically 20 years following the Walkerton crisis, where our water became contaminated. It really opened our eyes in Walkerton, and then I think across the province, to the vulnerability of our drinking water system. And then from that, looking at a number of other practices in our management of waste and our environment that really could lead to very, very short-term thinking that would ultimately be harmful. So it has been an interesting journey, and it's not over yet.
Well, you mentioned this journey. Can you be more specific as to where this journey has taken you now?
Well, it started, as I say, with the Walkerton crisis, where I was spokesman for the concerned Walkerton citizens, and we lobbied for the inquiry into that disaster so that we would have answers. And the result of that has been really a comprehensive set of recommendations that have been followed up to create a regime of protection that takes our water from its source and protects it there right through to the tap where people are going to be consuming that. And as that progressed, I realized that there were many things that we were doing locally that we could have answers to with the management of our waste. Things like clamshell plastics that you get raspberries and strawberries in. Things like the mountains of film plastic that we see in our landfills, but blowing around the roadsides and all over the place, which are very harmful to our environment. And then the most recent addition to our program of recycling would be the expanded polystyrene, more commonly known as styrofoam, which is the big packaging material that you see around many, many things that you'd purchase. And we've expanded it to take the takeout containers, which are extruded polystyrene, and also the meat trays that people take home on a regular basis.
And it seems to me that you've also been quite involved in the initiatives with zero waste.
Yes, really what we did was, in Brockton, we started about, I think more than 10 years ago, and we looked at it and said, well, how do we minimize the waste that we're taking to our local landfill at great expense? Because everybody wants to be near a landfill, but nobody wants it in their backyard. And we're talking multi-millions of dollars to develop these sites as we go. So we started with a waste audit, which was literally getting random samples of curbside waste, ripping them apart in a controlled environment, and dragging apart the components that were in there. So we found that 40% of that material was basically food waste that we just didn't consume, and looking at what we could do about that. Then we found things like reams of household batteries that we weren't collecting and had no path to recycling. We found mountains of film plastic, and we found, of course, lots of expanded polystyrene. And that formed the basis of plans going forward. And as a result, we've developed a number of pilot projects in Brockton and Walkerton to actually deal with these materials and find recycling paths forward for them. And that has led to a situation where we have been studied and visited by many, many municipalities saying, how can we become part of that?
For the average individual, how do you see them partaking in some of the initiatives that you are involved in?
Well, I think really the key is in the research. So when we first looked, going back to even something like e-waste, who takes it? Where is it got to be shipped to? How is it processed? How is it financed? And so with both initiatives from the Grey Bruce Sustainability Network and the Environmental Advisory Committee, we've been able to access some corporate grants and municipal participation that have allowed us to post or sort of put these things forward to the municipalities as low-risk ventures that we can study as pilot projects and then come back with the results. And as a result of those initiatives, none of the pilot projects have been canceled. They've all been made permanent. They've all morphed, and we've had some significant challenges. But really, if there are people in communities that don't offer this service or these types of services, my suggestion would be do the research. Speak to someone who's already doing it. We get calls from all over the place, and as a result, we invite those folks to come down and visit us, look at what we're doing and saying, how would that transfer to your community? Because I think if we start with the fact that this is not doable, that this is an insurmountable set of challenges we're facing, then the game is lost. But if you can make a proposal to a municipal council that there is a way forward that doesn't involve large capital expenditure, involves some marketing and some participation, then you've already got one of the ingredients that you need, is that partnership, and partnerships are essential to the success of these programs. Then you blend that with the public demand, because the public is really upset about putting plastics into our environment with no route for successful recycling, and it simply doesn't need to be that way.
If anyone feels the need or desire to help you, how do they contact the organization like the Grey Bruce Sustainability Network, or what's your suggestion?
Well, they could absolutely do that, and then they would be referred to me. At this point, coming from a small community in rural Ontario, I can tell you I'm the only Bruce Davidson in the book, and many people will contact me that way or through the email, which would be something I'd be happy to share online or in whatever form we want to get that out there. And then really look at what we're doing and see if that fits. And one of the biggest breakthroughs we're looking at right now is, for the past year, we've been in a pilot project where we have a small styrofoam densifier. And styrofoam is a wonderful material in that it's cheap and it has great cushioning abilities, great thermal ability, but it's very, very bad. It's basically oil if you don't recycle it. So we've been doing that successfully, but the other municipalities are looking at the challenge of saying, well, how would we get it to you in Walkerton if we didn't own our own system? And then we'd have to pay your staff to densify it, and then we'd have to jointly incur the cost of looking at research to market the material. There's a new system that we're looking at right now where the densifier is pulled behind a large pickup truck, has a diesel generator, super quiet, and it would arrive in your community, densify the foam that you have right on your site, and take it away. No marketing, no fuss, no muss. Very, very economical, and there's really no good reason that we've identified why all of Bruce Gray can't join in that program. To give you an idea of the quantities we're looking at, Walkerton and Hanover together, about a population of 12 to 15,000, if you add some of the rural areas in, maybe as much as 17, produces about 20 tractor trailer loads, 53 feet long, of this material every single year. Think of what Owen Sound would be looking at, many times that. Look at what the entire 2 counties would be doing. So what I look at is, if we have simple solutions that we can try as pilot projects, explore them, make the changes that are necessary, there's no good reason not to proceed in a way that has a great balance of risk to reward.
Well, Bruce, is there anything else that you would like to share with those of us who are looking for ways to help you?
Well, I think that what I would look at is the success of these programs, and if I could just touch very briefly on film plastics, we found in our audit that the average family of 4 in 1 month would put out 1 entire bag of film plastic. It's not heavy, but we don't close landfills because they're too heavy. We close them because they're full. Again, a material we've heard way too much about with its negativity in the environment. And so the success of the programs, even for Walkerton that's already doing them in Hanover, is having other communities join in that process. Because it's only by establishing a good economy of scale and a sufficient number of communities participating that we're going to save these programs as we transition to producer responsibility. They may look at the province and say, we want 85% of the film, plastic, or styrofoam that's out there recycled. Well, you don't need Grey Bruce to get 85%. We could be shut out. So it's incumbent upon us to not have that material, which is hazardous to our environment, downloaded into our landfills and into our lives and literally into our bodies. So I think that's the best way that people can work together to implement these programs everywhere. And people need to be stakeholders in their own lives. Don't hand it over to someone else. There is no magic environmental force coming over the top of the hill to save the day and do this. You have to fight for your community, and you have to make your case, and then have the perseverance by joining with groups like the Grey Bruce Sustainability Network, or what are a myriad of other environmental groups that are joining. Together we have power, together we have influence, and we can make good things happen.
Well, I thank you very much. Well, that was a short but sweet interview that Bruce offered us. Do we have any, and I believe that Bruce is with us, but do we have any questions for Bruce based upon what he mentioned today?
The famous styrofoam. How is the densified styrofoam used? Who's buying it, Bruce?
So if I can just update where we're at, I'm trying to remember when we recorded that, but what we did do was we looked at the challenge with our densifier, and the challenge was that ours is very small, can only do about 30 pounds an hour. And so it's very, very difficult to really extend that out to other municipalities because they'd have to pay to get it to us, pay to densify, and pay to market. We had a demonstration of Second Wind Recycling's unit, which is the portable one that came up in September, and many of the people on this call actually attended that. And so the beauty of that system is you don't have to buy it, because with the producer responsibility coming up and the change in the blue box, they are not guaranteeing that service of plastic, film plastic recycling or styrofoam recycling to municipalities that don't already do it. And if they go with that percentage model, it's going to end up coming from somewhere else. So I think if we stand up and say, wait a minute, let's get a critical mass of people here looking at it. And I don't want to disagree with what's been said already. Ideally, we would use better materials, but while we have these materials in play, let's not wait for that day when we don't. Let's make sure we start dealing with what we have in front of us. So in that short time since that demonstration back in September, 6 of 8 municipalities in Brockton are densifying or getting the material densified right now, or not Brockton, in Bruce County. And we have another 3 in gray that are seriously looking and are on the verge, I think, of moving forward with that. With film plastics, we have about 6 municipalities doing that now. These are not expensive programs. You don't own the material or own the densification equipment, and they've worked very well. So in terms of marketing, it's very hard to market material when you're collecting from a tiny municipality. But when you have something like Second Wind that's combining loads from right now, I think about 15 or 16 municipalities, then he has the critical mass of material to get the economy of scale, to get a better price. And that material is being used in things like fiber soundboard, picture frame molding, all kinds of different things, crown moldings. Every day they come up with something new that they're using it for. And so what we really want to do with both film plastics and styrofoam type materials or foam materials while they are in use is take it from a single use product into a durable good that's going to be there for many, many years and then can be recycled again. When you do that, you don't have to go and get more of the same material to keep making things that are just going to have one life. So if we can do that, I think that's the way forward. And marketing collectively is something we have to do because we don't have the expertise or the time as individual municipalities to do it.
Thank you, Bruce. Seems like I have a time for one more question. You were talking about the Second Wind, and it seems that the styrofoam is a hot topic, but I would like to know, what do you suggest that would be the most effective mechanism to raise municipal awareness about some of the initiatives you spoke about? Because Blue Mountains, Meaford, other municipalities, Grey Highlands probably, they start talking about it, but somehow we cannot get the message through. Or the message is probably accepted, but it's not that easy to implement, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's really a big challenge because the first thing that comes up is, well, we haven't budgeted for that program for this year. So the way around that is to say, have you budgeted for the problems it's going to cost you in the long term? They haven't. The other thing is that because you're not looking at great capital expenditures, to enter these programs, you're talking about very few $1,000s. Film plastics might be about $5,000 to deal with annually for a sized town of Brockton. The styrofoam is a similar number. And I think the very best way is seeing is believing. If you look at communities that are not collecting this material, they are generating it more than they know. Go to a furniture appliance store, and there's one, I won't name it, but one in the Meaford area, where picture 16 boxes that would hold appliances like dryers. I think every week they're putting that out, and that's going to landfill. So my suggestion is to set up a trial demonstration where you get Dane with Second Wind to bring his equipment up, densify it down, and the numbers are ridiculous. He can hold the equivalent of probably about 5 or 6 tractor trailer loads of that material in his 20-foot trailer, take it away, and then combine it with other loads and market it. So while this material is in play, I'd like to wave the magic wand and say tomorrow we don't have to deal with any of these materials. Unfortunately, that's a longer journey and an admirable goal. But in the meantime, let's get them out of the environment, give people the chance to do the right thing. The programs are immensely popular with the public because they want the opportunity to do the right thing, and they can't if we don't offer some kind of opportunity to participate.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Bruce, for the interview and for being here tonight.
You're very welcome.
Well, and we're going to move on to our last video. I don't know how we got this fellow on our agenda, but we did. It's Barry Randall, who is the managing director of the Grey Bruce Sustainability Network. And just to offer us a few words in this interview on the role of the Grey Bruce Sustainability Network and his role in the area. So would you like to show us, Kevin, what Barry had to share with us? Good afternoon, Barry. Thank you very much. This is Barry Randall, who is joining us this afternoon. Thank you very much for being here. He's the Managing Director for Grey Bruce Sustainability Network.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Now, Barry, how did you get into waste management?
Well, Vitold, that goes back many, many years, actually, when I lived in Guelph and worked with actually Ralph Nader's group, the Ontario Public Interest Research Group. And Guelph was a fairly progressive thinking city, and the Blue Box was a program that originated in part in Guelph, and I was involved in assisting with the development of that program as a pilot project. And I was involved in lots of other projects in Guelph, but I was also having a family and young kids, and an opportunity in Bruce County came up to coordinate the development of their waste management master plan. So that was quite a number of years ago. Before at the time there were 33 municipalities in Bruce County. So my family, my two young kids, we moved to a place called Walkerton. And I began my career up in the Grey Bruce area working on the Waste Management Master Plan.
And how did you get into Owen Sound, and what were the origins of Grey Bruce Sustainability Network?
Well, that was very much 12 years ago, I guess, from today. It was actually an evolution from an earlier group called the Grey Bruce Environment Network, which was a collection of people around the region who were very focused on environmental issues and wanted to form a group to better address issues and to share information, that sort of thing. So that group was an informal group, but as I say, about 12 years ago, a number of people, including Sally Leopard who lives in Grey County now, and Bruce Davidson and a few others, got involved with forming the Grey Bruce Sustainability Network, created a not-for-profit organization. And one of the big issues that group dealt with over the years was waste management issues. It shifted from simply an environment focus to a sustainability focus, which acknowledges the importance of including economic and social and cultural issues in decisions, not only environment, because if somebody doesn't have enough food on their plate, they're not going to be too worried about the garbage they're putting out. So that was a big shift for my thinking, and over the years, certainly we've still focused primarily on environmental issues, and Walkerton with the water tragedy and those sorts of things. We developed career programs for schools. We did lots of workshops for individuals on sustainable housing and energy efficiency and those sorts of things. So a couple of years ago, after my wife retired from teaching in Walkerton, and I'd worked a number of different jobs after that, but we felt Owen Sound was a good place to relocate. So we relocated to Owen Sound, and this building that we're in right now, the Harmony Center, seemed like an obvious place to set up an office for the first time out of my home office for the Sustainability Network. So that's also shifted a bit of the focus up to this neck of the woods, and has also exposed us to a whole group of people who are active in issues like climate change and that sort of thing. So it's also exposed us to the reality that in Owen Sound, as opposed to neighboring communities like Meaford, they're not doing composting, for example. So yet in neighboring communities, they are doing composting. So that's kind of my interest and expertise is how do we get these issues to be a regional change, not just, it has to be one community at a time until the whole region, say at a county level, can move ahead some of these programs.
But there have been individual initiatives that you have been involved with. Can you share some of these with us?
Well, specifically with waste management, a lot of it has had to do with the work with Bruce in the Walkerton area in terms of supporting getting materials like film plastic and styrofoam into the recycling market. I've also had a pretty good focus on events and that sort of thing. So certainly in the Walkerton area, but more recently for me in Owen Sound, we've moved to a zero waste approach with the Summer Folk Festival and trying to and do organic composting. And again, when it's an organization, things change from year to year, so you're always dealing with people's changes of attitudes and that sort of thing. But I think partly because of the climate change move and the influence and the interest in change, things seem to be happening more rapidly. Now, COVID obviously has slowed down a lot of things, but on the other hand, it's also caused people to think a little bit more about their own activities and maybe more focus on local food production and that sort of thing. But raising awareness and giving people alternatives than buying non-recyclable containers at the store, like sourcing local foods and having their own refillable containers, those sorts of things. Those are the practical things that I'm interested in. But I also believe that there's a need for corporate and government involvement in this and change, not only from the bottom up, but from the top down.
And it sounds from what you're saying that the role of Grey Bruce Sustainability Network is much basically in line with the networking of groups.
Well, the network is called a network, but it really has developed sort of a twin focus. One is connecting groups and individuals across the region, but the other is to act as a social enterprise and facilitate projects on the ground that can be shared around the region as best practices and that sort of thing. But it really is, we've got examples of projects over the years, whether it be career programs for schools or day-long workshops or event management workshops, those sorts of things that have all been financed by either admittance charges along with sponsorship and that sort of thing. So that's the kind of the social enterprise underpinnings of this, that in order to keep going on it, we need to generate jobs, we need to be aware of the connection to social and cultural issues, and recognize that the environment is shared by all of us, and we all have a responsibility to protect it.
So in this day and age of COVID-19 and climate action initiatives in our area, do you have anything that you'd like to share further with those of us that are viewing you as to advice of what we should be doing?
Well, I think sharing your ideas and your experiences about how to make change and sharing with your friends and with your neighbors and building clusters of support for this kind of thing. And also part of the online function of our network is to connect people in different communities that may not be physically connected, but we're not reinventing the wheel in most of these communities. So by sharing ideas, we find people in all over the region who are doing similar things. And I guess that's where it also connects to the government side of things. We need counties to be involved. We need provinces to support it. We need local municipal communities to be aware of these things so that change happens a little bit of it at a time, but eventually the pendulum swings and we have massive change, which is what we need these days.
Well, I thank you very much for your time today, Bear.
Thank you, Vitold.
Well, Simona, Do we have any questions for Barry?
We do. Barry, are you with us?
I am.
Awesome. We do have a question. Have you heard about the municipalities that been talking about amalgamating waste collection in Grey County, for example?
Well, certainly Grey County is showing some really strong leadership in terms of their planning process and how they, you know, their responsibility in terms of waste management is at an upper tier level. So they don't have direct responsibility for waste landfill sites or recycling. Those responsibilities remain at the lower tier municipalities. So I think, and this is an ongoing discussion right now in Owen Sound with respect to the official plan, is what is the role of the counties in terms of impacting the local municipalities to do certain things in a certain way. So there's great leadership there with Grey County, but I still am not perfectly clear as to what impact they can have on the actual lower tier responsibilities. My experience with Bruce County, could it be 30 years ago, was that I was doing a county level plan, but all the county had responsibility for was the planning. The lower tiers had all the responsibility for landfills and recycling, and were not willing to give up that responsibility to the county. Simcoe County, many years ago, took responsibility for waste management from the lower tiers, and they have a county landfill and they have a county level recycling program. So I still am not sure that Grey County can take control of it. They're certainly having a good influence on the lower tiers, though.
I think that to clarify, our deputy mayor in Meaford has mentioned that they are meeting with other municipalities with Grey County to talk about doing this. So I just want to know how the Grey County and the municipalities are talking together, whether you know.
Well, my role right now with the counties is more on the climate action team. I sit on a committee there with respect to that topic. So I haven't been direct involved in those discussions about waste management. But as I say, I think it's still, the county can have an impact. But if we're talking about a regional service that services the lower tier municipalities, in my opinion, the most efficient and the best way to do it is for the county to take over the responsibility for it. And it becomes a county program that's delivered similar to public health and other regional programs. And it can only be, in theory, I think it can be more efficient, but it also means the jobs go to the county. And that's what, in my experience with Bruce County, that's what the local municipalities didn't want to happen. So it's a bit complicated, but I think the county's having some influence for sure. That could be a long discussion.
Well,
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Barry. And I just wanted to thank all our participants, Barry, Bruce, Laura, and Jim. We handled an awful lot of information, and this is such a large topic, and every individual one of us can have so much and a large part to play in taking anywhere from minor to monumental steps by, as Laura says, just do one thing. So I'd like to thank all the participants, and especially all the people who also asked the questions and were here to witness the presentations and the videos. Just before I pass it on to Barry, I'd like to just mention our next event, which is happening in 2 weeks' time, is a part that's very dear to my heart, and where we will be chatting with at least three, or I think it's now four individuals on nature-based solutions to climate change. I'm really looking forward to that. And as I said, it's very dear to my heart. And so I hope that many of you will be able to join us in 2 weeks' time. So again, I'd like to thank everyone who helped tonight, Simona, Kevin, and Barry. It's all yours now, Barry.
And while we have you all here, I want to also promote a joint project with the Sustainability Network and the local Climate Action Grey Bruce teams. We're virtually bringing James Gordon, a well-known Canadian folk musician, to the Zoom screen on March 18th. It's a fundraiser for United Way Bruce Gray. So the proceeds, James will make some money at it, but some of the proceeds will go to United Way Bruce Gray. And if you register, it's a $10 or pay what you can fee, and you simply go to Eventbrite to register. If you go to our website, gbsusnet.com, you'll also see some overviews about it. James, actually, I used to play music and work with James in Guelph many years ago. He's always been an activist. His songs are very meaningful. And he's been a local City of Guelph councillor for the last 10 years as well. So he's demonstrated what you can do with an active community and literally get engaged directly with the lower tier municipalities. And I think my experience just recently in Owen Sound, when I'm seeing votes at the council being 5-4, in certain directions, I think it's so important that those of us around the table that have the desire, the ability, the time, yada, yada, to get involved in politics, to step forward, raise your hand and say, I'm going to put this on the table and really make the vote count. So raise your hand if you want to be on council next time and in your local community. Come on, raise your hand. I don't see too many hands. Anyway, just to finally wrap up, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And just to put it out for anybody that wants to get involved in the organizing of these kinds of events, we're certainly open to input. Just go via the website or our emails and connect with us and say, what's the best thing to move on to? Because our organization, I'm actually moving ahead or moving sideways, so to speak, as the managing director at the end of this month. But Lee and Simone and the fabulous board of directors is carrying on with our programs. I'll still be a project manager. And that's where I'm really interested in hearing from people who want to do projects on the ground, create employment for young people especially, but older people too, that will keep moving the needle towards a more sustainable community in all those areas. So we live in such a fabulous neck of the woods that we got to be really careful that it doesn't just move along in an area that we don't want to go to. So give us a call, let's talk. And unless there's anybody else that's got 2 cents worth, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Laura Wood.
Yeah, sorry, just to leave quickly. Next week, we will be launching our new video on YouTube on how to reduce household paper in your household. So we'll probably put a notice on your website, Barry, as well, but
totally.
Maybe I can send you the link, and if you'd send it out to the folks, just simple things that we can all do to reduce household paper.
That's great. And as I say, if anybody else has got other events, David, you're muted, buddy. Unmute. Okay.
Oh, there, I'm unmuted. You forgot to mention it's called the Emergency Climate Musical that James is bringing to us.
Of course, it's James Gordon, but he's doing the.
It's going to be fun and entertaining and somewhat interactive.
That's right. Thank you so much. And all that good information is on the website. So appreciate you saying that, David. Last call. Going once, going twice.
Thank you.
See you later.
Thank you. Bye. Bye all.